Ethan Cross woke up before his alarm, as he always did. The city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was still half asleep, wrapped in gray light and distant noise. From the 42nd floor, everything looked smaller than it really was, streets reduced to thin lines, people to moving dots. Ethan liked that view. It reminded him that height mattered, that distance created safety. Beside him, the bed was cold. Natalie had already left for the gym. Or a meeting. Or nowhere at all. It hardly mattered. Their mornings rarely overlapped anymore, and when they did, they were filled with polite silence and the soft glow of phone screens. Ethan swung his legs over the edge of the bed and sat there for a moment longer than usual. A dull pressure settled in his chest. Not pain, not yet. Just discomfort, like a warning he refused to acknowledge. He inhaled slowly, forcing the sensation down, the way he had learned to push everything inconvenient out of his mind. Weakness was a habit, and habits could be broken. In the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. Same tailored body. Same expensive haircut. Same sharp eyes that made people nervous across conference tables. And yet, something was off. "You're tired," he muttered to himself, straightening his tie. That's all. He left the apartment exactly on schedule. The car ride downtown passed in silence, broken only by the vibration of Ethan's phone. Messages stacked one after another, investors, lawyers, assistants. Each one demanded a decision, an approval, a signature. Ethan answered all of them. Control required constant attention. As the black sedan stopped in front of the glass tower bearing his company's name, Ethan felt the pressure return. Stronger this time. A sharp pulse beneath his ribs, irregular, unsettling. He paused before stepping out of the car. For a brief, irrational second, he imagined turning back. Canceling the meeting. Going somewhere quiet. Somewhere anonymous. The thought disgusted him. He stepped onto the sidewalk, straightened his jacket, and walked inside. The boardroom was exactly as it should be. 12 people. 12 screens. 12 faces trained to read his mood like a stock index. Ethan stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the glass surface as charts glowed behind him. His voice was steady, confident, filling the room with authority. "We acquire the firm by Q3, he said. No delays. No negotiations." A murmur of approval followed. That was when the pain struck. This time, it didn't ask permission. It slammed into his chest like a fist from the inside, stealing his breath mid-sentence. The room blurred. Light stretched unnaturally long. Someone's face twisted in confusion. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. The pressure intensified, radiating outward, jaw, shoulder, arm. His heartbeat felt wrong, chaotic, as if his body had forgotten its own rhythm. Not now, he thought. Not here. He forced himself to continue speaking, words spilling out mechanically, but the room was slipping away from him. Sounds became distant, as though he were underwater. "Ethan," someone said. He tried to respond. His legs gave out. The world tilted violently, and the glass table rushed toward him as darkness swallowed the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard was a chair scraping backward and someone shouting his name. Cold. That was his first sensation when consciousness returned. Cold air filled his lungs in short, panicked gasps. He was lying down, strapped into something that moved, the ceiling lights flashing past in blinding intervals. An ambulance. Voices hovered above him, urgent and clipped. Blood pressure dropping. Heart rate unstable. "Stay with us, sir." Ethan tried to speak, to assert himself, to demand answers. All that came out was a rasp. Fear crept in, not the dramatic kind he'd seen in movies, but a quiet, suffocating realization. This was happening without his permission. His heart hammered, then stuttered. Images flashed through his mind, uninvited. A younger version of himself, laughing without restraint. A woman's face he hadn't allowed himself to remember in years. A promise made in the rain and never kept. The pain surged once more. Then his chest seized. The world went white. Hospital lights replaced the siren's scream. Hands pressed against his chest. Commands barked in rapid succession. A monitor's high-pitched whine pierced the air. Cardiac arrest. Something heavy struck him, lifting his body off the table. Once. Twice. Then nothing. Silence swallowed everything. No pain. No fear. No thoughts of power or loss. Just emptiness. In operating room 3, the flat line stretched endlessly across the screen. Ethan Cross, CEO, husband, architect of an empire, lay motionless beneath harsh lights, his suit cut away, his chest exposed, his body reduced to numbers and probabilities. Outside the operating room, a set of doors burst open. A woman in a white coat stopped mid-step as she saw the name on the chart. Her fingers tightened around it. For a moment, the world around her faded. The alarms, the rushing staff, the sterile smell of disinfectant. All she could see was a name she had buried a decade ago. And the man attached to it, now balanced on the thin line between life and death. She took a breath. Then she walked in. Dr. Elena Morozova had learned long ago how to separate faces from outcomes. Patients were systems. Bodies were problems to be solved. Emotion had no place under surgical lights. That discipline had carried her through years of training, night shifts, and losses she never spoke about. It was the only reason her hands didn't shake now, or at least, that no one noticed. She stood just inside operating room 3, eyes locked on the monitor screaming its accusation. Flat line. Time slowed, stretching into something unreal. Doctor, a nurse prompted, uncertain. Elena forced herself forward. The body on the table felt wrong before she even looked at the face. The broad shoulders, the familiar structure, memory whispered before logic could intervene. Then she saw him. Ethan Cross. For a fraction of a second, the room disappeared. She was 22 again, standing in a library with cold hands and ink-stained fingers, watching a man smile like the world belonged to him. Her breath caught. Not here. Not now. Elena, the anesthesiologist said sharply. We need direction. Her training snapped into place like armor. Resume compressions, she ordered. Prepare for defibrillation. 200 joules. Her voice sounded steady. Professional. Detached. Inside, something fractured. She didn't allow herself to wonder how he had ended up here. Or why fate had placed him on her table of all places. Those questions were luxuries. Right now, there was only the body failing beneath her hands. Clear. The shock lifted him slightly off the table. Still nothing. Again. Elena watched the monitor, jaw clenched, refusing to let herself look at his face again. She focused on procedure. Airway. Rhythm. Pressure. The steps were familiar, comforting, even. They gave her something solid to hold onto while the past pressed in from all sides. 10 years. 10 years since she had last spoken his name out loud. The room buzzed with tension as minutes passed. Time? Someone asked. 7 minutes, a nurse replied quietly. 7 minutes without a heartbeat. Elena's chest tightened. Statistically, survival was slipping away with every second. She leaned closer, checking his pupils, the line of his jaw. And memory struck her with brutal precision. The way he used to rest his thumb against her wrist when he thought no one was watching. The confidence that had once felt like safety. The ambition that eventually consumed everything else. Her hands pressed harder against his chest. You don't get to leave like this, she whispered, so softly no one else could hear. The defibrillator was charged again. Protocol suggested calling it soon. Elena knew that. Everyone in the room knew that. She looked at the monitor, then at the clock on the wall. Her supervisor met her gaze, reading the hesitation in her eyes. "Elena," he said carefully, "we're approaching." Again, she cut in. A pause. Then he nodded. "Clear." The shock jolted through Ethan's body. The monitor stuttered. Once. Then, a flicker. A weak, unstable rhythm appeared. Someone exhaled loudly. "We've got something," the nurse said. Elena didn't relax. Maintain compressions. Prepare medication. She stayed with him, directing every movement, correcting every hesitation, until the rhythm strengthened just enough to hold. Only then did she step back. Her knees felt weak. As the room settled into controlled motion, Elena finally allowed herself to look at his face. Unconscious, he looked different. Younger. Vulnerable. Stripped of the arrogance that had once both attracted and destroyed her. A strange ache spread through her chest, not relief, not anger, but something unresolved, unfinished. She turned away before anyone could notice. Outside the operating room, Elena leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her heart was racing now, adrenaline crashing through her system. She should report a conflict of interest. She knew that. The ethical line was clear, too clear. But she had already crossed it. Not by saving him. But by wanting to. A nurse approached quietly. "You okay?" Elena nodded once. "Who's next of kin?" the nurse asked. Elena hesitated. "His wife," she said finally. "Natalie Cross." The name tasted bitter. Of course he had a wife. Men like Ethan always did. Elena washed her hands slowly, methodically, scrubbing away blood that wasn't really there. She stared at her reflection in the stainless steel sink. "You should feel nothing," she told herself. "You don't get to feel anything." And yet, her pulse refused to slow. Because beneath the white coat and years of discipline, there was still a woman who remembered what it felt like to be chosen. And what it felt like when she wasn't. As she turned back toward the ICU, Elena knew one thing with chilling certainty. Saving Ethan Cross had been the easy part. Facing him when he woke up would be far worse. 10 years earlier, Elena Morozova believed that life unfolded slowly, one careful decision at a time. She spent most evenings in the university library, tucked into the far corner near the tall windows, surrounded by medical textbooks and half-empty coffee cups. The world beyond the glass felt distant, louder, faster, impatient. Here, time behaved differently. That was where she first saw him. He wasn't supposed to be there. The library was quiet, filled with the soft rustle of pages and the muted tapping of keyboards. Ethan Cross walked in like the place belonged to him, suit jacket slung over one shoulder, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, confident tones about numbers Elena didn't yet understand. She noticed him because he didn't belong. He noticed her because she didn't look up. Ethan ended the call and scanned the room, irritated, as if expecting someone to challenge his presence. Instead, he saw a woman bent over an anatomy atlas, hair pulled into a careless knot, completely indifferent to him. Curiosity tugged at him. He crossed the room and stopped at her table. "You know this section closes in 10 minutes, he said casually. Elena glanced up, startled. "Oh," she replied, blinking. "Thank you." She didn't smile. She didn't apologize. She simply went back to reading. Ethan frowned, not in anger, but surprise. No recognition. No interest. That was new. He returned the next evening. And the one after that. Sometimes he pretended to read. Sometimes he watched her from across the room, fascinated by her focus. Elena studied like the world depended on it, thoroughly, intensely, as if knowledge itself were something fragile that could be lost if mishandled. Eventually, she noticed him noticing her. "You don't turn pages," she said one night without looking up. What? You've been on the same page for 20 minutes. Ethan laughed quietly. You caught me. She finally met his gaze. That was the moment something shifted. Not sparks. Not fireworks. Recognition. They began talking in fragments. Short conversations between chapters. Quiet jokes whispered across the table. Arguments about ambition and purpose that stretched long past closing time. Ethan spoke of expansion, of building something lasting, of never being small again. Elena spoke of healing, of responsibility, of the weight of holding another life in her hands. You think too much, he told her once. You don't think enough, she replied. They smiled anyway. Their worlds could not have been more different. Ethan came from money, influence, expectations. His future was mapped out in boardrooms and contracts. Elena came from discipline and sacrifice. Scholarships, night shifts, and a mother who reminded her daily that nothing was guaranteed. Still, somehow, they met in the middle. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks through empty streets. Long walks turned into moments neither of them named. The first time he kissed her, it was raining. She hadn't planned for it. Neither had he. What Elena remembered most was not the intensity, it was the quiet. The way Ethan would watch her read, resting his chin on his hand. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her thoughts mattered more than his own. The way he softened when no one else was around. With her, he was not a future empire. He was just a man. And for a while, that was enough. But ambition doesn't sleep. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan's phone began to intrude. Calls during dinners. Messages during conversations. Meetings that couldn't wait. Elena pretended not to notice. You're building something, she told herself. That's not a flaw. Still, a quiet fear took root. She had seen men like him before, brilliant, driven, endlessly unsatisfied. Men who outgrew people. One evening, after a long shift, Elena found Ethan waiting for her outside the hospital. You're exhausted, he said, brushing hair from her face. So are you. Come with me, he said suddenly. Where? Anywhere, he smiled. Just. Don't disappear into that building every night. She hesitated. Her world was fragile, carefully balanced. I can't, she said softly. Not like you. Something flickered behind his eyes, disappointment, maybe fear. For the first time, Elena realized something dangerous. She loved him. She never told him. Not then. She believed there would be time. The memory faded as Elena stood outside the ICU, staring at the glass wall separating her from the present. Inside, Ethan lay unconscious, surrounded by machines. 10 years had passed. Dreams had shifted. Promises had broken. Lives had diverged. And yet, somehow, it all led back here. Back to a library that closed too soon. Back to a kiss in the rain. Back to a man whose heartbeat now depended on her restraint. Elena turned away. The past was supposed to stay buried. But it was awake now. And it wasn't done with them. Love did not collapse all at once. It thinned. At first, Elena didn't notice the change. Or maybe she chose not to. Her days were consumed by lectures, hospital shifts, and exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. Ethan, meanwhile, was accelerating, meetings stacked on meetings, plans unfolding faster than she could follow. They learned to live between schedules. Late dinners. Missed calls. Messages sent at red lights and answered hours later. Still, when they were together, the world narrowed to the space between them. Ethan would show up at her apartment past midnight, loosen his tie, and collapse onto the couch like gravity had finally claimed him. Elena would sit beside him, tracing the tension from his shoulders without speaking. You work too much, she told him once. So do you, he replied, eyes closed. They smiled, a fragile agreement neither believed. There were moments when Elena caught glimpses of the future pressing in. At parties filled with polished smiles and effortless wealth, she felt like a visitor from another life. Ethan introduced her proudly, but the conversations always drifted: investments, acquisitions, names she didn't know. Someone once asked her, "And what do you do?" "I'm studying medicine," she answered. A polite nod followed. Then the conversation moved on. Ethan noticed. Afterward, in the car, he said, "They don't matter." She looked out the window. "They matter to you." He didn't respond. The first real argument came quietly. Elena had just finished a 30-hour shift when Ethan canceled their dinner, again. She stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, staring at the untouched food growing cold. "You said you'd be here," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. Something came up." Something always comes up. A pause. "You knew who I was when we started this," he said carefully. "And you knew who I was," she replied. "I'm not asking you to stop being ambitious. I'm asking you to show up." Silence stretched between them. "I'll make it up to you," he said finally. She didn't answer. Despite everything, love remained, stubborn and unyielding. On weekends, when schedules aligned, they escaped the city. Long drives with no destination. Coffee in roadside cafes. Moments where Ethan laughed freely, without calculation. In those spaces, Elena believed again. She believed they could grow together instead of apart. She believed love could negotiate with ambition. She was wrong. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope. A gala. A milestone announcement. Ethan's official introduction into a world that had already claimed him. "I want you there," he told her, eyes bright. "It matters." Elena hesitated. She owned one dress suitable for events like that, and it made her feel like someone else. Still, she said yes. Because love often says yes before it understands the cost. The night of the gala, everything glittered. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne that tasted like money. People who spoke in certainty and expectation. Ethan looked effortless, confident, admired, fully in his element. Elena watched him from across the room, pride and distance twisting together in her chest. Then she noticed the way people looked at her. Not with hostility. With assessment. As if measuring how long she would last. The moment that broke her came without warning. Ethan was called to the stage. Applause thundered as he spoke about vision, growth, legacy. Elena listened, heart swelling despite herself. Then someone asked about the future. "Family," the man prompted. "Stability." Ethan smiled. "Of course," he said. "At this level, stability is essential." Elena waited. He didn't look at her. Didn't mention her. Didn't acknowledge her existence. The applause drowned out the silence she felt inside. Later, she found him near the balcony, drink in hand, glowing with success. "You were incredible," she said softly. "Thank you," he smiled. "Did you enjoy it?" She searched his face. "You didn't include me." His smile faltered, just slightly. "It wasn't the time," he said. That conversation was strategic. "I'm not a strategy," she replied. "No," he said quickly. "But this world is." Something hardened between them. The argument that followed was sharp, restrained, and devastating. "You're ashamed of me," Elena said. "That's not true." "Then why do I feel invisible?" "You don't understand how things work at this level," Ethan snapped. "Not everything can be emotional." She stared at him. "And I can't love someone who edits me out of his life." The words hung heavy between them. They didn't break up that night. They went home separately. And something essential never found its way back. Years later, standing in a hospital corridor, Elena remembered that moment with painful clarity. The way he had chosen the room over her. The way she had realized love alone was not enough. Inside the ICU, machines hummed steadily. Ethan Cross lived now because she had fought for him. But love? That had been lost long before his heart stopped. Elena sensed the end before it arrived. Not as a moment, as a shift. A subtle rearrangement of priorities she no longer occupied. Ethan still called. Still came by when schedules allowed. Still kissed her goodbye with familiar warmth. But something in his attention had fractured, divided between her and a future she could not follow. She felt it in the pauses. In the way his eyes drifted to his phone mid-conversation. In how decisions were made without her. Love, she realized, could exist alongside abandonment. The invitation came 2 weeks after the gala. A private dinner. Key investors. An announcement that would change everything. Ethan told her over breakfast, voice carefully neutral. "You don't need to come," he said. "It'll be long. Boring." Elena looked at him steadily. "You don't want me there." He sighed. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" She wanted to ask. "From being seen?" But she only nodded. "All right." That was the moment she should have walked away. Instead, she waited. The dinner was held in a historic mansion overlooking the river. Elena arrived late, not invited, but compelled by a quiet, stubborn need to see the truth with her own eyes. She wore a simple black dress and nothing else that belonged in that world. Inside, laughter spilled from crystal-lit rooms. She found Ethan near the center of it all. He looked different. Relaxed. Assured. Untethered. And beside him stood a woman Elena had never seen before. Tall. Elegant. Perfectly composed. Her hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm, familiar, comfortable. Something inside Elena went still. She didn't confront him immediately. She watched. The way he leaned toward the woman when she spoke. The way people addressed them as a unit. The way no one looked surprised. Realization settled in, cold and undeniable. This wasn't new. When Ethan finally noticed Elena across the room, his expression shifted, surprise, then panic. "Elena," he said, pulling away slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see," she replied quietly. "See what?" "The future you didn't think I belonged in." The woman beside him excused herself with polite grace, leaving them alone in the crowd. "You weren't supposed to be here," Ethan said under his breath. "Neither was she," Elena replied. "But she's standing where I used to." They stepped onto the terrace, the city glowing beneath them. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through his calm. "This isn't what it looks like." "It looks like a decision," Elena said. "One you made without me." He hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. "She's important," he admitted. "Her family, her connections. This partnership." "Stop," Elena said. The word cut clean. "I don't need details. I need honesty." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she saw conflict without affection winning. "I can't live in two worlds," he said. The sentence landed like a verdict. Elena's voice was steady when she spoke again. "So you chose the one that doesn't require you to explain yourself." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I chose the one that allows me to build what I'm meant to build. And I don't fit into that vision." Silence confirmed it. Inside, applause erupted. Someone was making an announcement. Ethan glanced toward the sound, instinctively drawn. That was the moment Elena understood the truth. Even now, even here, he was already gone. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They spoke quietly, surrounded by wealth and music and people who would never remember her name. I loved you, Elena said. Ethan closed his eyes. I know. That hurt more than any denial. He reached for her hand. She pulled away. Don't, she said. Don't turn this into something gentle. If you're leaving, leave completely. His voice broke. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, she replied. And you knew you would. Elena left without another word. She walked past champagne glasses and smiling strangers, out into the cold night air. Each step felt unreal, disconnected from the life she was shedding. She didn't look back. Because some endings become permanent the moment you acknowledge them. Years later, standing beside Ethan's hospital bed, Elena remembered that night with painful clarity. The terrace. The city lights. The way he had chosen power over love without ever saying the words aloud. She adjusted the four-line with professional precision. Her face revealed nothing. But inside, the woman who had walked away that night stood perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. The ICU never truly slept. Machines hummed in steady rhythms, monitors flickered with numbers that meant everything and nothing at once, and the air carried the faint scent of antiseptic and exhaustion. Elena moved through it all on autopilot, her body following routines her mind barely registered. Ethan lay in the bed closest to the window. Alive. Barely. The irony was sharp enough to hurt. She checked his vitals without hesitation. Heart rate unstable but holding, blood pressure low, oxygen adequate for now. Her hands were precise, detached, doing what they had been trained to do. It was her thoughts that betrayed her. 10 years, and this was how they met again, not across a table, not on a terrace, but through a glass wall and a heart monitor. Elena. She turned to see Dr. Harris approaching, his expression careful. You don't have to stay on this case, he said quietly. We can reassign. She knew what he was really saying. Conflict of interest. Emotional involvement. Risk. I'm capable, she replied evenly. I know, he said. But capability isn't the same as distance. Elena held his gaze. He's a patient, she said. Nothing more. The lie settled easily on her tongue. Hours passed in fragments. Medication adjustments. Consultations. Paperwork that demanded focus she no longer had. Every so often, Elena found her eyes drifting back to Ethan's bed. Unconscious, he looked smaller. Reduced. The man who once filled rooms with his presence now depended entirely on machines and strangers. She wondered, not for the first time, whether this was punishment or mercy. Near midnight, the doors to the ICU opened again. A woman stepped inside, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Natalie Cross. She looked exactly as Elena had imagined, composed, flawless, untouched by panic. Her eyes moved quickly, assessing the room, the equipment, the staff. Then they landed on Elena. Recognition flickered. Not warmth. Not hostility. Calculation. You're the attending physician, Natalie said. Yes. My husband, she asked, already turning toward the bed. Elena followed. He's stable for now. The next 24 hours are critical. Natalie nodded, absorbing the information like a report. And prognosis? Too early to say. Natalie placed her hand gently on Ethan's arm. You'll do everything necessary, she said, more statement than request. Elena met her gaze. We already are. There was something unsettling about the interaction. No tears. No fear. Just control. As Natalie stood there, Elena saw the future Ethan had chosen, immaculate, strategic, untouched by doubt. And for the first time, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The crisis came suddenly. An alarm pierced the quiet, sharp and urgent. Ventricular arrhythmia, a nurse called out. Elena was moving before the words fully registered. Prep a meodoron, she ordered. Increase oxygen. Ethan's heart rhythm spiked, erratic and dangerous. Natalie stepped back, finally shaken. What's happening? Please wait outside, Elena said firmly. But. Now. Natalie hesitated, then complied. The doors closed. The room narrowed to essentials. Elena stood at the foot of the bed, eyes locked on the monitor. She knew this pattern. She knew what it could lead to. If his heart failed again, the odds would drop dramatically. She adjusted the medication, her mind sharp, focused, until a single thought broke through. If he dies, would that be easier? The question horrified her. She pushed it away with force. This was not about them. It was never about them. Come on, she murmured, watching the rhythm stabilize inch by inch. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the monitor settled into a fragile normal. A collective exhale filled the room. Later, Elena stood alone at the sink, scrubbing her hands. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, exhausted, older than she remembered being. She leaned forward, gripping the edge. You don't get to choose outcomes, she reminded herself. Only effort. And yet, she knew the truth she refused to name. If the moment came, the real moment, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go. Not as a doctor, but as the woman he once left behind. As she returned to the ICU, Elena paused by Ethan's bed. He stirred faintly, a muscle twitching beneath the sheets. Not awake. Not yet. She adjusted the blanket with a gentleness she did not acknowledge. Don't make me choose, she whispered. The machines answered with steady, indifferent beeps. Morning came without ceremony. The ICU's fluorescent lights hummed over sleeping monitors, and the outside world remained oblivious to the storm contained in these walls. Elena had barely slept. Her body craved rest, but her mind refused. Ethan's condition had stabilized overnight, but stability was deceptive. One wrong heartbeat, one missed sign, one fraction of a second, and everything could unravel. She walked past the beds, past the machines, past the murmured conversations of nurses and interns who did not know, could not know, the history entwined in these wires and screens. Ethan's bed drew her like a gravity field she did not want to acknowledge. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm that should have been ordinary. Yet, to her, it was extraordinary. The man who had once rejected her, who had walked away from everything she had offered, now lay utterly vulnerable, entirely dependent on her decisions. She questioned herself. Again. Could she separate the past from the present? Could she perform her duty without being pulled into the web of memory and resentment, desire and regret? The answer had always been a lie. Duty alone was never enough. Natalie appeared again, calm, deliberate. Any updates? She asked. Elena glanced at the monitor. Stable. No major changes. Natalie studied Ethan's face, smooth and unlined even in his unconscious state. You're his doctor, she said, almost conversationally. But you must understand, some decisions may have consequences beyond what you imagine. Elena's pulse quickened. The tone, subtle, warning, almost a test, reminded her of the old games they used to play in the office, when Ethan had delighted in challenges he could control. I understand, she said. Firm, neutral. Controlled. And yet, deep inside, she felt the stirrings of an old fear. Not fear for her career. Not even fear for her conscience. Fear for herself. What would she do if he asked for something? Something impossible. By mid-morning, the critical phase had passed. For now. Elena sat at the desk, reviewing charts and vitals, methodically, mechanically. Every movement precise. Every observation recorded. But her mind wandered. She imagined him awake, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. The Ethan she had loved, flawed but sincere. The Ethan who had once promised more than he could give. The man she had abandoned, perhaps in fear, perhaps in frustration. And she imagined the other Ethan, the one Natalie had molded him into, composed, strategic, untouchable. A man she could never reach. One decision lay ahead. Simple on the surface. Medical protocol dictated intervention, full resuscitation if his heart failed again. The law was clear. The hospital rules were clear. Duty demanded it. But Elena knew him. She knew the fragility beneath the veneer. She knew the moments when pushing harder could mean breaking him entirely. And she knew that, somewhere deep, he would trust her judgment, or resent her for it. A choice, professional, moral, personal, waited like a knife at her throat. It came in the form of a subtle change. A fluttering heartbeat, erratic, weak, almost imperceptible. The monitor's steady beeps flickered, like a candle struggling against the wind. "Ethan," she whispered under her breath, as though speaking might anchor him to life. Nurses noticed the change immediately. "Arrhythmia," one shouted. Elena froze for a fraction of a second, long enough to feel her chest tighten, long enough to taste panic. Her hands moved automatically. Medication. Oxygen. Stabilization. But a voice in her head, a voice she did not expect, whispered another option. Do nothing. The words were abhorrent. Illegal. Impossible. Yet, tempting. She remembered the conversations, long ago, in darkened rooms, when she and Ethan had argued about freedom, about choice, about control. He had always prized autonomy above all else. Did that mean she should let him choose? Or was this a perverse echo of her own longing? To punish, to forgive, to rewrite the past through action in the present? The monitors screamed at her, stabilize. Save. Do your duty. Her fingers hovered over the chart. One move could seal everything, life or death, duty or desire. Her mind raced. She imagined the grief if she failed him. She imagined the anger if she saved him and he woke to see her there, the past unresolved between them. She imagined the emptiness if she chose wrong. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, she made her decision. Not out of obedience. Not out of revenge. Not out of longing. But out of understanding. She intervened. Carefully, precisely. Administering medication, adjusting the oxygen. Monitoring each heartbeat. Correcting, stabilizing, saving. The monitor steadied. The rhythm normalized. Ethan's chest rose and fell with quiet resilience, as if he, too, had accepted her choice, or at least survived it. Natalie returned soon after, eyes sharp, assessing, calculating. He's stable, Elena said quietly. Natalie's gaze lingered on her. You made the choice, she said. Yes, Elena replied, controlled. The choice I had to make. Natalie said nothing further. Only nodded. And yet, Elena sensed approval beneath the surface, a recognition that this was more than protocol. This was understanding. Alone, Elena exhaled, her body finally acknowledging the tension she had carried for hours, for days, for years. She understood now, choices were never simple. They were never purely right or wrong. They were echoes of the past, projected into the present, with consequences that stretched into the future. And she, alone, bore them. The next step awaited. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of relief. Because she had chosen. And in that choice, she had not betrayed herself, nor him. The battle was not over. Not by far. But the first line had been drawn. By late afternoon, the hospital's rhythm had slowed. Machines hummed like distant engines, and the corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm coffee. Elena walked slowly to Ethan's room, clipboard in hand, though her notes now felt irrelevant. Every step echoed inside her chest, a hollow drum of anticipation she could not silence. The door opened before she reached it. Ethan sat up in bed. Weak, pale, still tethered to monitors, but alert. The flutter of tubes and wires did nothing to diminish the presence of the man she had known, the one whose laughter had once filled empty rooms, whose arguments had once bruised her spirit in the way only intimacy could. He looked at her. Really looked. Not just at her uniform, not at her professional facade. Her stomach tightened. Words fled. Finally, he spoke. "Why are you here?" Simple. Direct. A question loaded with everything. Accusation, curiosity, fear, and a trace of something softer, almost unspoken, hope. I'm your doctor," she said, the words tasting like lies even as she spoke them. His lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. That's one way to put it. Elena fought to maintain control. This was not the moment for personal histories, for confessions, for grudges. And yet, the air between them felt charged with the weight of years. "You saved me," he said. The statement hung in the room, heavy and awkward. "Yes," she said. "I had to." "No," he countered softly. "I mean, you chose to. When you could have, not." Her pulse quickened. She swallowed. It wasn't a choice, really. It was, her voice faltered. It was necessary. Ethan tilted his head, watching her carefully. Necessary for whom? The question cut deeper than she expected. Not for him, not for her professional duty alone. Necessary for both, for the tangled web they had created long ago and left unresolved. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. He drew it out from her, this confrontation. "You've changed," he said, almost a statement, almost a question. Or maybe. "I've changed, and I didn't notice until now." The words unsettled her. She had rehearsed answers, defenses, professional detachment. None felt adequate. "You can't expect things to be the same," she said finally. "I don't," he replied. His voice was calm, but under it lurked a tension she remembered well, a storm always ready to break if pushed too far. Silence stretched between them. Then came the hardest part, the admission neither had dared to voice until now. "I was angry," she said quietly. "Years ago. When you left. I blamed you for everything, for me, for us. But I was wrong." Ethan's eyes softened, though the faint line of pain remained. "I didn't leave because I didn't care," he said. "I left because I didn't know how to stay. I was scared, of failing, of hurting you." Her throat tightened. She remembered every late night, every harsh word, every bitter argument that had ended with slammed doors and silent nights. "Do you think that changes anything?" she whispered. He shook his head. "No. It doesn't erase it. But it reframes it. Makes it something we can face, if we want." Elena looked at him, really looked. For the first time in years, she saw the vulnerability beneath his composure. Not weakness, exactly, but honesty, raw, unpolished, and terrifyingly human. "I don't know if we can," she admitted. "We won't know," he countered. "Unless we try." The hospital noises faded. The beeping of machines, the distant murmur of voices in the corridor, all became background, almost irrelevant. They were two people, confronted by their past, standing on the edge of something fragile and dangerous, reconciliation. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan asked quietly, almost as if testing the waters, "Do you forgive me?" The question caught her off guard. Not the words themselves, but the vulnerability behind them. She had never heard him speak like this, stripped of arrogance, stripped of strategy, stripped of the defenses that had protected him for so long. She paused, swallowing hard. "I don't know. I want to. I think. I do." He nodded slowly, understanding. Not all questions could be answered immediately. Not all wounds could heal at once. Then we start there, he said. Her chest loosened. Not completely, there was still fear, still tension, still the undeniable complexity of their history, but a small opening had appeared. A fracture in the wall they had built around themselves. I never wanted to hurt you, he said, almost in a whisper. And I never wanted to hate you, she admitted. The admission hung between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of years. The confrontation was not dramatic. There were no accusations shouted, no grand gestures, no sudden emotional outbursts. It was quiet, steady, painfully human. They confronted their choices, their regrets, their fears, and for the first time, they did it together. And in that quiet confrontation, something shifted. It was not resolution. It was not forgiveness. It was not even love, at least, not fully. It was acknowledgement. Recognition of the past. Acceptance of the present. A fragile hope for the future. Ethan's hand twitched slightly, and she reached out, hesitating, and touched it. Warm. Solid. Real. He looked at her, and for the first time, really saw her, the woman who had been his adversary, his confidant, his healer. And she saw him. Not the man she had loved and lost. Not the man she had despised. But him. The confrontation was over. The consequences were only beginning. The hospital room was quiet, but outside, the world kept moving. Cars honked faintly in the distance, nurses passed with clipped efficiency, and the sun cast a golden, almost mocking glow across the linoleum floor. Inside, time felt suspended. Elena sat beside Ethan's bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The confrontation had ended hours ago, but its reverberations had not. Every word, every glance, every unspoken truth hovered between them like fragile glass. Beautiful, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, steady and calm, yet behind it was a tension she could not name. He had survived the surgery, the near death, the hospital stay, and yet now he faced a different kind of challenge, the question of what to do next. I have to make a decision, he said finally, his voice low, almost hesitant. She looked at him. About? Everything. About us, about. He hesitated, then gestured vaguely to the machines, to the hospital room, to the invisible weight of the past. About what comes next. Elena nodded slowly. She understood more than he realized. Decisions were not just about the present, they were about consequences, about courage, about the willingness to step into uncertainty. I know, she said. I have decisions to make too. For a moment, they sat in silence, each lost in thought. The hospital's routine ticked on around them, indifferent to their turmoil. I could leave, Ethan said, breaking the quiet. Go back to the life I had before, pretend this never happened. And that would solve. Elena's voice was sharp, but not unkind. He shook his head. Nothing. Nothing at all. But it's the easy choice. The safe one. Elena felt a pang of recognition. She had taken easy choices before, had built walls to protect herself, had ignored the risks of letting someone close. And yet, she could not do that now, not with him, not after everything. You don't get to be scared, she said. Not now. You survived. You have to live, fully, not halfway. Ethan's eyes met hers. There was a flicker there, uncertainty, fear, but also something else, hope. And you? He asked softly. What about you? Will you? He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. I will, she said finally. I want to. But I have to be honest. It won't be easy. It will take time. And it will take courage. Courage, he repeated, almost tasting the word. I forgot what that felt like. Then remember it, she said. Because you'll need it. They both knew the truth, decisions were not singular, not simple. They were threads, each one pulling on another, weaving a future that was uncertain and terrifying. And yet, in that uncertainty, there was possibility, the chance to reclaim what had been lost, or at least to face it with honesty. Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to try," he said. Elena's heart raced. She wanted to respond immediately, to say yes, to embrace the hope that had begun to bloom between them. But she also knew that actions mattered more than words, that trust had to be rebuilt, that past wounds had to be acknowledged and respected. "You have to prove it," she said gently. "To me, to yourself." "And you?" he asked. "Will you trust me?" "I'll try," she admitted. "But it's a process. We can't rush it. We have to take it step by step." Ethan nodded. "Step by step," he repeated, and the words sounded like a promise, fragile but real. Outside the room, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor. The light shifted, warm and soft, illuminating the space between them in a way that felt almost sacred. "I don't know what the future holds," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to face it, with you." Elena's hands trembled slightly. She reached out and took his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the pulse of life, the tangible presence of the man who had once been her adversary, her love, her lost companion. "Then we start," she said. "Here. Now. Together." It was not a grand declaration, not a dramatic turning point, but it was real. And that was what mattered. They sat together, hands intertwined, letting the weight of the decision settle. The air around them seemed lighter, charged with a new energy, a fragile hope. They knew challenges lay ahead, fears, regrets, misunderstandings, the ghosts of the past. But for the first time in years, they were facing them not as separate people, but as a unit, fragile yet united. Ethan squeezed her hand. "No more running," he said. "No more running," she agreed. The decision had been made. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And in that moment, with the sun setting outside and the hospital hum fading into the background, they allowed themselves to believe, just for a moment, that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way forward together. It was a choice that demanded courage, honesty, and vulnerability. But most of all, it demanded presence, the willingness to face the present, with all its pain and beauty, and to step into it fully. Elena leaned closer, resting her forehead lightly against his. "One step at a time," she whispered. "One step at a time," he echoed. The hospital room, with its machines and antiseptic scent, became a sanctuary. Not a perfect one, not a permanent one, but a place where decisions could be made, where trust could begin to be rebuilt, where love, cautious, fragile, and tentative, could take root once more. And as the light outside faded into the deepening dusk, they held on to that possibility, letting it anchor them in a reality that, for the first time in years, felt bearable, even hopeful. The first week after their decision passed in a strange, fragile harmony. Elena and Ethan moved cautiously, aware that even a single misstep could unravel the fragile trust they had begun to rebuild. They walked together through familiar streets, spoke in quiet tones, laughed when the shadows of the past seemed to retreat. But the world outside their fragile cocoon did not pause. Reality returned with a sudden, almost violent urgency. The hospital called with news that shook Ethan to his core. Complications in the paperwork for his recovery leave threatened to force him back into a regimented schedule far earlier than expected. He could barely process it before Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Work demanded her attention on the same day, a critical meeting she could not postpone. They stared at each other across the small apartment that had become their sanctuary, and for the first time, the weight of the outside world pressed in. "This isn't fair," Ethan muttered, pacing the small space. I thought we could just have some time." "I know," Elena said softly, moving to stand beside him. "But life doesn't pause for anyone. Not for us, not for anyone." He stopped pacing and turned to her, eyes searching, desperate. "Then what do we do? How do we hold on to this, to each other, when everything is pulling us apart?" Elena took a deep breath. She had thought she understood compromise, thought she could bend without breaking. But the reality of conflicting obligations and looming pressures tested her in a way she had not anticipated. "We adapt," she said finally. "We find ways to be present even when the world is demanding otherwise. It won't be perfect, but it can work if we both try." He nodded, though the doubt lingered in his expression. The decisions they had made felt suddenly fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a turbulent river. The first test came the following day. Ethan's recovery leave was delayed yet again due to bureaucratic red tape. He had to return for a mandatory check at the facility, an appointment that clashed with a project Elena was leading. They tried to rearrange, to negotiate, but every attempt only highlighted the harsh reality. The world did not bend to their newfound commitment. "You have to go," Elena said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying worry. "I can't stop your recovery. This is important." "And you?" Ethan asked, voice tight. "Your work, it's important too." "I'll manage," she said, but the words felt hollow. She knew the strain was only beginning. Their attempts at maintaining connection were tested further when external voices began to interfere. Friends, colleagues, even distant family members seemed eager to offer advice, some supportive, others judgmental. Each comment, each opinion, chipped away at the fragile balance they were trying to maintain. "You're rushing this," one friend had said, noticing their closeness. "You barely had time to process everything. Are you sure this is wise?" The words echoed in their minds, sowing doubt. They had survived crises, fought for survival, faced mortality. And yet, the simplest human interactions now felt like obstacles. The first real confrontation came on a rainy afternoon, when Ethan returned from his checkup to find Elena exhausted and frustrated, the strain of her responsibilities etched into every line of her face. "I can't do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I want to be here for you, for us, but everything is falling apart around us. I feel like we're barely holding on." Ethan reached for her hand, desperate to anchor her. "We can't let this break us," he said. "We decided to try. We said we'd take it one step at a time. We can't lose that already." "I know," she said, tears threatening to spill. "But it feels like one step forward, 2 steps back. How do we keep moving when everything keeps pushing against us?" They sat in silence, letting the rain drum against the windows. Outside, the city moved relentlessly, uncaring of their struggle. Inside, they confronted the truth: love alone was not enough. Commitment required endurance, patience, and resilience in the face of relentless external pressures. That evening, they made a pact. They would face the obstacles together, but they would also be honest about their limitations. If one of them could not cope, they would communicate, not hide. They would fight for the relationship, but they would also fight for themselves. It was a turning point. Not a dramatic, life-altering event, but a subtle shift in understanding. They realized that love did not exist in isolation, it existed in the friction between people and the world around them. Their commitment was no longer just about choice, it was about endurance, strategy, and adaptability. The following weeks tested them further. Unexpected complications with Ethan's health, a demanding schedule for Elena, and small but persistent misunderstandings threatened to push them apart. Yet, with each challenge, they learned. They learned patience. They learned compromise. They learned that the smallest gestures, a shared meal, a brief phone call, a reassuring touch, carried weight far beyond what they had anticipated. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, they sat together on the balcony of Elena's apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the rain-soaked streets below. Ethan held a cup of tea, Elena a notebook she had been forced to carry everywhere. "We're surviving," he said quietly. "Not thriving yet, but surviving." "That's enough for now," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Surviving is the first step to thriving. And we're here, together." He smiled faintly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Then we keep going. One step at a time." Yes, she agreed. One step at a time. It was not a perfect resolution. There were no grand declarations of victory, no final moments of triumph. Instead, there was understanding that life's trials were ongoing, unpredictable, and often harsh. But within that understanding, they found strength. The weeks of cautious equilibrium shattered on an ordinary Thursday morning. The first warning had been subtle, a terse email from Elena's company, demanding immediate travel for a high-stakes client meeting. But what followed spiraled quickly into chaos. Ethan received a call from the medical facility. His latest tests showed unexpected complications, meaning he might need an extended period of care that could last months. The simultaneous pressure felt suffocating. For the first time, the delicate balance they had built threatened to collapse under the weight of reality. Elena paced the apartment, her phone pressed to her ear as she negotiated with her employer. Her voice, usually calm and authoritative, wavered as she tried to assert boundaries that barely existed. "I understand," she said, biting back frustration. "But there's no one else who can manage this. I'll handle it myself if I have to." On the other line, Ethan clenched his fists, staring at the medical report he had just received. His recovery, painstakingly slow, was suddenly at risk. And worse, he felt powerless, a stranger to his own circumstances. When they finally spoke face to face that evening, tension coiled between them like a living thing. Neither wanted to confront the depth of the crisis, but avoidance was no longer possible. This might be too much," Ethan admitted, his voice low, almost broken. "I can't be what you need right now, and you can't stop the world from demanding everything of you." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I know. I feel it too. Every second feels like we're being pulled apart." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. They had faced challenges before, uncertainty, fear, physical limitations, but this felt different. This was a test not just of their love, but of their resilience, their ability to navigate a world that seemed determined to break them. The first real rupture came when miscommunication ignited frustration. Ethan, fearing he would be a burden, withdrew, responding with short, clipped sentences. Elena, overwhelmed by work and emotional fatigue, misread his distance as resentment. "You don't even care," she finally burst out one evening, slamming her laptop shut. "You've been avoiding me all day. I'm trying not to be a problem." Ethan snapped, his voice raw with emotion. "I'm trying to survive this, and I thought, maybe I shouldn't drag you down with me." The words hit harder than either expected. Elena sank into the couch, trembling. Ethan stood frozen, realizing that his attempt to protect her had backfired. They had reached a crisis point, a moment where silence could fracture their bond completely. For hours, they sat in the apartment, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. Rain pelted the windows, wind rattling the frames, as if the world itself were pressing in to witness their struggle. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep doing this, hiding, pretending, avoiding the truth. If we don't face this together, we'll lose more than time. We'll lose each other." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't want that. I don't want to lose you. But I'm scared, Elena. Scared that this, all of this, is bigger than us." They spent the night talking, unraveling every fear, every doubt, every hidden thought that had accumulated over weeks. It was brutal, exhausting, but necessary. By dawn, a fragile clarity emerged. The crisis was not a sign of failure, but a test, a reckoning that would determine the strength of their commitment. The following days demanded action. They restructured their schedules, delegating work when possible and coordinating medical care with painstaking precision. Every decision carried weight, every choice a potential turning point. And yet, for the first time, they faced it not with silent anxiety, but with deliberate cooperation. One particularly tense evening, after a grueling day of appointments and travel arrangements, Ethan looked at Elena and realized how much they had grown, not just as individuals, but as a team. "Do you see it?" he asked quietly. "Even now, with everything against us, we're still standing. Still together. Elena smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into her features. It's not easy, she said. And it's far from perfect. But yes, we are still here. And that matters. Yet, the crisis had left its mark. They were no longer naive about love, about resilience, about the world's capacity to intrude on personal lives. The storm had tested them in ways they could not have anticipated, forcing them to confront vulnerabilities they had long ignored. The block ends with them sitting together in the quiet aftermath of a particularly overwhelming week, exhausted but connected. The crisis had not been vanquished, challenges remained, threats loomed, but the moment had crystallized something vital. Their relationship, though battered and fragile, had endured its first true test. They had learned that crises are not merely obstacles to be avoided, they are crucibles in which strength, patience, and trust are forged. And in that understanding, they found a renewed sense of purpose, to face the world together, whatever it might bring. The days after the crisis were quieter, but the silence was no longer suffocating. It had become reflective, filled with the kind of calm that follows a storm, the kind that allows space for thought, healing, and subtle growth. Elena and Ethan moved through their routines differently now, with a mindfulness born from the chaos they had endured. Ethan's health stabilized gradually. With proper care, he regained some strength, and though the recovery was far from complete, the shadow of uncertainty had lifted enough to allow cautious optimism. Each small improvement became a shared triumph. When he managed a longer walk without pain or successfully handled a task he had feared impossible, Elena was there, quietly cheering, their hands brushing, eyes meeting in a shared acknowledgement of resilience. Work, too, began to find a rhythm. Elena renegotiated responsibilities at her job, carving out space to balance career demands with personal priorities. She learned to delegate, to trust others, and, in turn, to trust herself. Each boundary she set was a testament to lessons learned from the crisis, lessons about overextension, self-respect, and the necessity of pacing. Yet the real resolution was internal, emotional. The argument that had threatened to break them apart now served as a reference point. A reminder of the fragility of avoidance and the power of openness. Ethan and Elena discovered the value of candid communication, of articulating fears and needs rather than letting them fester silently. One evening, they sat together in the apartment, a rare moment of leisure after a week full of progress. Rain tapped gently on the windows again, but this time it was soothing rather than ominous. Ethan watched Elena sketching in her notebook, lines and shapes forming a small, imaginative world she had been building quietly. "You've changed," he said softly, almost hesitant to break the calm. Elena looked up, curious. "How so?" You're calmer. More deliberate. You don't rush or panic like before. I can see it in the way you breathe, the way you talk. It's peaceful." A faint smile curved her lips. "I suppose we both changed," she said. "The crisis. It forced us to confront what we were avoiding. And in doing so, we learned a kind of patience we didn't have before. With each other, with ourselves." Ethan reached out, taking her hand. "I feel it too. I see it in you, in us. And I feel grateful. Grateful that we didn't let it break us." Their conversation meandered into dreams, small ambitions, and future plans. They discussed Ethan's next steps toward full recovery, Elena's career aspirations, and the possibility of traveling together when life allowed. There was a softness in their dialogue, a mutual care that contrasted sharply with the tension of recent weeks. But the resolution was not simply about returning to normalcy. It was about integration, taking the lessons of adversity and embedding them into daily life. They began to actively build habits that strengthened both individual and shared well-being, weekly planning sessions, intentional moments of rest, honest check-ins about emotions, and time carved out for shared hobbies. One day, Ethan surprised Elena with a small, handcrafted journal. Inside, he had written notes, reflections, and sketches inspired by their journey. "I wanted us to have something tangible," he said. A reminder of what we've been through, and what we're capable of when we face challenges together. Elena's eyes glistened with emotion. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the cover with her fingers. "I'll treasure this." The weeks that followed solidified a new rhythm. Conflicts still arose, as they naturally do in any close relationship, but now they approached them with tools rather than panic. They had learned the importance of pauses, of listening, of allowing time for understanding rather than reacting impulsively. Each resolution of a small conflict built confidence, reinforcing the foundation that had been shaken but never shattered. They also began to embrace life's uncertainties with a shared courage. A sudden work demand no longer triggered panic, a medical concern no longer incited dread. Instead, they faced challenges as partners, pooling strengths and compensating for weaknesses. They discovered joy in small victories, a meal cooked together, an evening walk in sunlight, a quiet conversation that lasted hours. Perhaps the most profound change was in their perception of love itself. No longer a simple notion of affection or attraction, love had evolved into something resilient and active, a commitment to care, to communicate, to endure. They had seen how fragile it could be, but also how strong it could become when tested. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance, Ethan reflected aloud. "Do you remember how we thought everything would fall apart? How we feared we couldn't survive it?" Elena leaned against him. "Yes. And now, it feels like we survived not just by chance, but by choice. By choosing to fight, to stay, to grow. Together." The city lights flickered, distant sounds of life carrying into the quiet of their space. In that shared stillness, they understood something profound. Resolution was not an endpoint but a continuum, a conscious effort to apply wisdom gained through adversity. They remained aware of the world's unpredictability, of challenges yet to come. But they no longer feared the future as they once had. Instead, they approached it with a sense of preparation, resilience, and above all, partnership. As night deepened and the city hummed softly below, Elena and Ethan held hands, no words necessary. The crisis was behind them, but its lessons lived on. Their bond, now tempered and deepened by trials, had become a source of strength rather than fragility. And in that understanding, they found not only love but profound confidence, confidence that whatever came next, they would face it together. Time moved gently after the storm, each day a quiet affirmation of what had endured. The world outside continued with its rhythms, bustling streets, distant sirens, and the endless tide of human activity, but inside their shared space, there was a sense of permanence and calm that neither Elena nor Ethan had anticipated. The apartment, once a place of tension and hurried routines, had become a sanctuary. Books lined the shelves, sketches and photographs adorned the walls, and small plants thrived on sunlit windowsills, their growth a subtle mirror of the couple's own journey. Every object, every corner, carried a story of resilience, care, and the conscious effort to transform survival into life. Elena returned to her work with renewed purpose. She approached projects with the patience and mindfulness cultivated during the crisis. The lessons she had learned about boundaries, self-care, and the importance of asking for help were no longer abstract ideas but daily practices. She noticed, too, that her colleagues responded to her differently, perhaps sensing the quiet confidence and balance she now carried. Ethan, steadily regaining strength, began to explore passions he had set aside for far too long. He immersed himself in projects that nurtured creativity and purpose, from building small models to experimenting with photography. These pursuits were no longer distractions from fear but celebrations of possibility. Each day, he pushed gently against limitations, aware of his progress and patient with setbacks. Yet, their greatest achievements were not professional or personal accomplishments in isolation, but the life they were building together. They had discovered that love was not static or simple, it was dynamic, requiring constant attention, honesty, and effort. Their bond, tested by adversity, had become a source of profound security. They could laugh freely, speak candidly, and dream without hesitation, secure in the knowledge that they faced life as a team. One Sunday morning, the city bathed in soft sunlight, they ventured out for a walk along the riverbank. The air was crisp, carrying faint hints of autumn leaves and distant blossoms. As they strolled side by side, they spoke of small dreams. A trip to a city they had never visited, a weekend hiking expedition, even the idea of adopting a pet to share their home and their hearts. Elena paused, looking out over the water, and reflected aloud. It's strange, isn't it? How we feared so much, yet now it feels like life is just beginning. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand gently. I know. The fear was real, but so was our choice to face it. And in that choice, we found something stronger than fear. They continued walking in comfortable silence, the rhythm of their steps echoing the harmony they had discovered in their lives. The city moved around them, oblivious to their personal triumphs, yet they carried a quiet certainty that no external chaos could undo what had been built between them. In the evenings, they returned to rituals that grounded them, cooking meals together, reading aloud, sharing sketches, or simply sitting in silence, hands intertwined. Every moment, ordinary or extraordinary, was now infused with intention. They had learned to cherish the mundane as much as the remarkable, understanding that life's true richness lay in these seemingly small, consistent acts of care and connection. Months later, as winter approached, they celebrated not a milestone of wealth, career, or status, but the intangible triumphs of growth, understanding, and enduring love. They held a quiet dinner at home, candles flickering softly, the room filled with the warmth of shared memories and laughter. They raised glasses to one another, a silent toast to resilience, to partnership, and to the life they had consciously chosen to nurture together. And in that moment, Elena and Ethan realized something profound. While life would inevitably bring challenges, uncertainty, and sorrow, they were no longer defined by fear or circumstance. They were defined by choice. The choice to care, to endure, to grow, and to love deliberately. As night settled over the city, they stood at the window, watching distant lights twinkle like stars fallen into human hands. Their reflections merged with the glow of the city, symbolizing not only who they were but who they had become together. In that stillness, there was a sense of completion. Not finality, but continuity, a promise that the future, while unknown, would be faced with courage, patience, and unwavering partnership. The story of their crisis, once a looming shadow, had transformed into a narrative of resilience, hope, and profound connection. And as they turned from the window to face each other, smiles soft and eyes bright, the unspoken understanding passed between them, whatever tomorrow might hold, they would meet it together. And in that togetherness, they had found the truest resolution of all.